This is Stephen beginning on fisheries policy. If we could stay on the first slide for a moment. I trust everybody's hearing me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're looking here at the process of how policy for fisheries contributes to fisheries management. And this diagram is to demonstrate the circular process of how policy is developed, legislation created, compliance and enforcement operated, and a continual cycle of catch data coming back to re-inform fresh policies in the future. And we saw in the Korea presentation how policies change over time, beginning with a policy that seeks the maximum fisheries production, and over time moves to a policy that reflects the need for conservation and fisheries management. So for the process that's being gone through in Bangladesh at the moment, Bangladesh being a democracy, the information is gathered for citizens to consider how they would like to see their fisheries managed by their government. These objectives are put together through a consultation process and create the objectives for fisheries management. The policy, which we'll look at in a moment, by Bangladesh from 2006 is very well set out and has an important set of priorities. Back to the first slide, please. So having decided what the policy objectives are, government then creates the necessary legislation, the fisheries law, which implements the policies that are decided by the population. Fisheries laws have infrequent passing periods, so fisheries rules accompany fisheries laws, and the rules can be modified by the Fisheries Administration depending on how circumstances change. And they also are required to make fisheries management plans, which specify how each fishery is managed on an annual or other periodic basis. So having decided the fisheries law, created the rules, and set up the management plans, these are then enforced through a compliance and enforcement system run in Bangladesh by the Department of Fisheries. This is in cooperation with the fishing communities under the co-management structure, who manage the artisanal fisheries, and the industrial sector is managed directly by the Government Fisheries Administration. The Government Fisheries Administration collects all the data on the activities of artisanal and industrial fisheries. That data is then analysed, and as that analysis continues, fresh decisions are taken about policy if they are needed. So we're looking here at the policy directions currently published by countries surrounding Bangladesh. So in India, for example, this is the federal government's policy for Indian fisheries management, and it specifies the health and economy and viability and socially inclusive fisheries sector that contributes towards economic prosperity and well-being of fishers and fish farmers, provides food and national security to the country in a sustainable and responsible manner, all fine words. A robust management and regulatory framework with necessary legal backing for effective fisheries resource management using ecosystem approach to fisheries management. Modernize, rationalize, and diversify fishing practices in oceans and seas with sustainability of resources as the core philosophy. Now, that policy does not prioritize specifically the needs of the artisanal sector. It is more focused on production by an industrial sector and looks to continually modernize both sectors. In India, the fish stock situation has some areas of overfishing and some areas where it is still sustainable. This policy is overall for all species, and one would need to look more carefully at what specific fisheries management plans and how they respond to that policy. The situation in Thailand is rather different. They have a very substantial overfishing with a lot of stock loss and many pressures on Thailand fisheries to improve that situation. And this policy that they have recently published describes the transformation that they need to make to bring about the necessary conservation measures to rebuild fish stocks. So in that policy that is currently in place for Thailand has very specific objectives to deal with the very difficult problems. In Myanmar, there is a similar situation. There is substantial overfishing by all stocks, by both sectors, artisanal and industrial. And the policy in place for Myanmar recognizes this overexploitation and is seeking to modernize existing laws and policies together with adaptive management to bring about the necessary conservation measures. This is currently on hold with current changes in government in Myanmar, but that was the policy under the past government. Bangladesh Fisheries Waters, as was shown earlier today by the PD, has a structure of management at the current time. The inshore zone inside the 40-meter depth contour is reserved for artisanal fisheries. There is some wandering by industrial vessels into that zone, as has been seen by satellite imagery. The industrial fleet is very large, 250 or so vessels operating in 6,200 square nautical miles of continental shelf, makes this continental shelf one of the most concentrated industrial fisheries in the world, with big requirements to improve that management, which the Sustainable Coastal Marine Fisheries Project is hoping to set out to do. One area of the exclusive economic zone of Bangladesh is the deep slope, where the blue arrow is, where the water depth varies from 80 meters down to 1,500 meters. And that deep slope area has fish stocks which have been identified by Min Shandani, which do have some additional fishing opportunities. There is some talk about the development of the Oceanic fishery in the deep water beyond the continental shelf. This is highly seasonal. Tuna do pass through this area, but only very seasonally. So some very important discussion needs to take place about what stocks might be available in those waters. During the period when the Department of Fisheries was operating its database under the capacity building project, it was possible to analyze the locations and sizes of boat types for the artisanal fishery. And this diagram here shows us the concentration of the red circles are the mechanized vessels and the blue are the non-mechanized. This shows us where the artisanal sector needs priority to be able to reach the fishing zones which will support fishing communities. Bangladesh 2006 fisheries policy objectives were set out at that time and still apply. And they have some most important conditions to ensure that marine fish stocks and habitats are maintained in optimum condition. Where there is overfishing, habitat degradation, or species loss, to ensure management measures and resources for recovery. Thirdly, to allocate fisheries resources first to artisanal fishing communities for local and national economic benefit and food security. This is a most important policy decision, which should be informing how necessary rules are enforced at the current time and what licenses are made available in both artisanal and industrial sectors. The fourth point, commercial and industrial fisheries to be controlled to fish stocks that are underutilized after national artisanal fisheries needs are satisfied, so that they do not impact community fisheries under rules that secure full sustainability for all fisheries. The fifth point, commercial and industrial fisheries access to be subject to payment of rent that covers all management costs and provides economic return to the economy of Bangladesh. So these 5 points are very important. the new Fisheries Act, which was passed in 2020, needs further improvement to be able to satisfy these requirements as set out in the policy. And work is going on at the current time with the rules to strengthen the ability of the department to implement fisheries management along these 5 principles. And these 5 principles lead to the Sustainable Development Goals 14, which were earlier described, to which Bangladesh is a signatory. Again, going back to the database when it was still functioning, it was quite possible to see what was taking place in particularly the artisanal fishery, where the numbers of boats had increased by 22% over 4 years. Fish catch increased by only 3% in the same period, and catch per boat declined by 20% in the same period. The average boat would need to be able to double its current landings to be profitable. So this demonstrates to us that the policy decisions that were set out in 2006 have not been realized so far. And I understand that this is the reason for the policy being reviewed and the further additions to the rules which are currently in progress. So I hope this gives an overview of how policy helps to define how laws and regulations and rules are set up, and the need for fisheries management plans, and the need for the very important changes that are needed for the marine fisheries sector in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.